Hello, word nerds! Welcome to our Sunday live chat. Today we are going to be discussing the end. What happens at the end of a novel? We're going to talk about how to write them, some of our favorites, some maybe some do's and don'ts. Feel free to jump in the comments below. We are going to be watching the whole time, and we will answer questions in between chatting about the end. And it was like when I saw that plate in our little Dropbox folder, I was like, the end of what? Panicked for a moment. It's like, the end of what? Yeah, no, everything's fine. We're going to be talking about endings. Oh, I got a rainbow. Okay. What? On my hair.
That was a rainbow on
yeah. So I just like looked down. I was like, whoa.
I thought that was like an internet thing. I'm like, is that like a heart on Twitter? Like, is a new YouTube feature? Too old for this. What is it changing now?
No, just all right. The sun's setting where I live, so now I just have a rainbow. Okay. All right. So yes, also Desiree will be joining us, but she's having some computer troubles. So the whole fam jam is going to be here for this chat, which is going to be nice. Yeah. So to start off this chat, I'm going to be asking you guys to say how you plan your endings. I know some people like to really plan them. Some people like just do whatever. Some people plan them like way ahead. So how do you do it? First person I have is Erin.
I usually am planning from, chapter 1 to all the way to the end. So I have an outline. And I usually will know what the climax is. And that's the biggest hurdle for me personally as a writer to plan, essentially. And when that's planned, then I could just have the falling action from there and then the wrap up. The hardest part for me is like actually the prose at the end, like wording everything so it has like a final feel is the hardest for me. But I don't have too much trouble with the falling action because I think Emma was saying earlier she likes that part. I do too. I like writing that part.
All right. And what about you, Emma?
Yeah, so I really like writing the falling action, like Erin said. It's like I was saying before we started the chat that like if the whole book could just be like falling action, I'd be really happy because it's like my favorite thing to write. And it's like one of my favorite things in books when it's done well. I pretty much always like know or like have an idea of what the ending is going to be like before I even start writing. Like I know like where the characters are going to be kind of like emotionally and physically. Like I know what the last scene is going to be. And sometimes I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there. Like I have a lot of trouble writing like the climax of the story and figuring out how to like resolve all the conflict. But I always know like where the characters are going to end up. And it has a lot to do with like where they start too. So I always know like where they start and where they end up and kind of like how those two like end points kind of reflect each other and like how the character has changed over time. So I like my first scene and my last scene to kind of like there to be some things that kind of like reflect the character's growth and kind of like signal back to the beginning. So I always have an idea of how I'm going to do that.
All right. And what about you, Kelly?
It's varied book to book for me. I know my first novel I published, Mortality, I like the idea got in my head because I knew what the ending was going to be for one of the characters. So everything else kind of evolved from that ending. But in a lot of cases, I only have kind of a vague idea of the ending, but lately I'm trying to like hardcore plot right through to the ending of a series if I can. Like I want to write something where everything perfectly leads up to an epic ending. It just, so far, I have not had the patience for it, but that is my big goal.
And Megan.
So with my first few books that I ever wrote, I had the ending very hardcore plotted out. And now I like to plot it out a little bit less. My climaxes tend to butt very hard up against the falling action. Like there's not a lot of stuff that happens afterwards. And so for me, I usually figure out how do I say this? Where people are all going to clash at once. Because I like to know, who are all my major players? What are all their problems? Where am I going to make them all face off? And aside from that, plot-wise, I don't really think too much about it. I do very much like to know emotionally, where their character arc is going to end. So if my character starts out as, I don't know, the princess, but she's super afraid of things, maybe I want her to end as unafraid, but also having stepped out of the shadow of her title or something. And I don't necessarily know all the things I'm going to do to make her get to there, but I know that every scene I write is going to be taking a step closer to that point.
I mean, yeah, those all seem like good endings, good plotting. I'm kind of in the same boat as Kelly, where like sometimes I know and sometimes I don't. I'm also getting like major rainbow face right now. So, okay, it's fine. I look so beautiful. Okay. Like the book that I'm currently writing, I have no idea how it's going to end. I only knew how it was going to begin. But then one of the other books that I was writing, I was like, I know exactly my beginning, and I know exactly my end, and like how they're going to mirror each other, and I'm going to figure out how this character is going to get to here, and I know the midpoint. Like I was very structured in it. So I guess it depends on like what the muse decides to give me that day. It depends per project. And then moving on from that, one of my other questions is, what do you like your endings to have? Because some, as I have read a lot, some books end with like everything wrapped up in a perfect bow, and some are like, figure it out yourself. So like, where do you think you land in there? Like, what do you prefer when you're reading books? It's a free-for-all, just go ahead. I'm not going to pick on anybody.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like something kind of in the middle of those two, where like, because I don't like everything wrapped up in a perfect bow, and I don't like things to be like perfect. Like I think there have to be some losses and some like compromises and things like that. Like your character has to have gone through some sort of hardship, and like there probably is some sort of negative consequence from like decisions they made. And like, yeah, and I don't like everything like, let's wrap up every single like little like thing that's ever been mentioned, where it like feels unrealistic, but I also don't want it too open-ended. That makes sense. And like, I don't want it to just be like totally depressing. So like, I like something that's like kind of bittersweet and like wraps up like the major, like I want the major like plot questions or the major themes to be like resolved in some way. But like, I like there to be a little bit of openness. Like the characters are going to be going on into like future adventures or whatever, their lives continue after this. There's like more to their world,
Yeah. I feel like I'm a big sucker for genre, like the staples of the genre ending. So if I'm reading a romance, I want them to be happy at the end. Like, I want them to have that perfect bow. And it doesn't have to be like marriage and kids or something, but I do want them to be like together and happy, and nothing is on the horizon that's ever going to make them hurt again. But if I'm reading a horror, like I want them to come out ragged at the end. I want them to be just totally wrecked.
Yeah, I'm very much like, I cannot handle an ending that's too open. Like the only time I've ever physically chucked a book across the room was when it was like, I don't even remember what book it was, but it was when I was like 15 or 16 and I read this like giant novel, and then at the end it was like, whatever happened to them, maybe or something like that. And I was like, no.
The only book I like that in is The Giver, which like has like a very open ending, and like I refuse to acknowledge that there are sequels because like I think The Giver has like this perfect like open ending of like, are they dead? Did they find another society? Is he hallucinating? Who knows? And then she like wrote more books, and I'm like, no.
See, I can't handle that. I hate that. And I like bittersweet is my favorite for sure. It's like there needs to have been some loss. And they should be trying to recover from that, basically.
And I think Megan kind of said it, like it really depends on the genre. So like what are you expecting in a fluffy contemporary romance? Like obviously it has to be happy. In a fantasy novel, some of the main characters had better die because otherwise like what are you doing in war, like that kind of thing. So I think that's where especially I get like kind of angry when stuff ends really something that's not in their genre, if that makes any sense. Because like I just finished a series of like pretty magic-y war related books, and in the end like no one died and everybody was happy, and they're like cracking jokes on the last page, and I'm like, y'all just went through war. Like which one of you has PTSD? Like where is it coming from? It was very strange. And so I was like, this is not a good ending to especially series ending, which is also difficult.
I think you definitely have to be mindful of like the tone, like tonally, like what the rest of the story has been like, and that needs to like sync up with like the tone of the ending.
Yeah, I really like what Emma you said about matching your beginning and your ending. I actually do that for every manuscript, like Witches of Ash and Ruin starts with a scene that's like very dramatic of like all these ravens crashing through the school classroom window and basically attacking students. And then in the end, the ravens are back, but like in a different way, which no spoilers, but like it like beginning image and then ending image and then sort of setting the same spooky tone, right? So, yeah, full circle.
Yeah, I have a similar thing in the book I'm writing right now where like the first scene starts kind of like with the main character like in this like courtyard, like surrounded by like these people she's grown up with who are like her closest friends. And then I want the last scene to be her like still in the same location, but like she's alone now and she's like lost all of them in some way, you know? Yeah. So and she's like isolated where before she was like surrounded by friends.
That's powerful.
Well, obviously, we're all going to say that we want an ending that's like wrapped up, you know, at least somewhat nicely. But because we have been bragging on like open endings, do you think, like kind of Emma said with The Giver, like is there a point where you're like, yes, I like how open this is, or are you just like, no exceptions, like it has to be closed off?
I can be a big fan of an open ending, and it's always like if that is what you write, people are gonna hate it. So, for example, we talked about. In our Burn, Rewrite, Reread chat, we talked about the Delirium trilogy, which has a very open ending. And people can be pretty divided on that, but I'm a big fan of it. Like I really liked the ending of that trilogy. I'm not sure if there's a way to like predict which books are appropriate to have the open ending. I'm sure the more I think about it, I'll come up with a bunch of reasons after we go off air. But I can definitely be a big fan of the open ending.
I feel like dystopian has the most open endings. So I completely forgot about Delirium, but you're right. I was actually sort of thinking of like Divergent and like how the whole ending to that series is very like, I know it's not very open, but it's like, oh, like we know that this society has, you know, done this thing and now we're moving on. And it seems like even like Hunger Games, it seems very like, we've taken down the system and now the world is before us. And it kind of has that
Hunger Games
like, letting
is like
you think about it.
Very much more angry with Divergent's ending, but Hunger Games was like a weird, like heavy feeling ending, which it kind of needed to have in a way because like they're gonna have PTSD. That was the problem with the Harry Potter ending, right? Like everything's happy and fluffy and la la la. It's the perfect world. I'm like, you guys should all. You've been through war. You've lost people. You should all be like, I don't know, like seeing some therapists.
I think that is like one of the main things that, I mean, of course it's YA, you know, you have your plucky young teenage heroines going around, you know, but even a lot of them do end up going to war. And at the end, you know, you're like, oh, I'm 17 and battle hardened, but like power of friendship, you know, that kind of thing. So like, it's very like, you know your audience, but also not really realistic in that manner. So like the end is usually very like uplifting, like we just survived a war. Like I wonder what's next in life, and it's like next in life is you going to a therapist.
I read a pretty good ending it's a book series by Robin Hobb. I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically something assassin, and he lived a very violent, like horrible life. He had horrible things happen to him essentially, and lost all of his friends. Blah blah blah. And the ending was like. It was somber tone, right? Because if it had been like a happy ending, it wouldn't have suited the whole series or been realistic, right? But it showed you that he was like still continuing on, essentially. Right? Like it had hope in it, even though it was a heavier ending, right? Which felt tonally consistent. So,
yeah, I think open endings can often do well in books that are like a little bit more literary. I think that tends to be the type of story they tend to do well in. And yeah, it's like hard to like pinpoint like, oh, this book would be good with a open ending. I think it's just all about like how the open ending is executed too. Like, you know, like it's not even about a specific type of book maybe, but like how well the writer can do it. Usually. But I think the best ones are like the ones where like readers like debate afterwards, like what happened, you know, like because that's how like The Giver is like you read it in like middle school and afterwards like you all like debate what you think like has happened to them, you know, because they like are going down this sled on a hill and they like hear singing and see like lights in a house and it's like is it real or are they dead? We don't know.
Interesting. I don't know what my reaction to that would be because I haven't been charitable towards those types of endings.
Yeah, I think it does it really well. It's just
really
based on like the
depends.
type of book it is all along and like the tone of it and everything, it works really well. Where I think something wrapped up too neatly wouldn't have made sense within the story, which is why I reject that the sequels exist.
So I guess like if you do want to do an open ending, how do you strike that tone with your book?
So, like, anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Oh, man.
I don't. That is a good question. I don't do open endings, or haven't yet. So, well, nope, that's a total lie. Oh, I just realized I have sort of a very open-ended epilogue, kind of like a like, oh no, I'm trying not to be spoilery, but it's still like I like to think that I've balanced it because it's like everyone is safe for now type of thing. Like they're in a good place for now, but something is going on somewhere else far away that's like, oh, there's possibly going to be a book 2. Right? There's a storm brewing, but it's far away enough that everyone is happy and safe for now. Happy. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like the end of like the first Harry Potter book where like she didn't know if she would get more books. Like it's kind of like, the day is saved and like Voldemort didn't get the Sorcerer's Stone, but he's still out there somewhere. Like
that's exactly why Witches of Ash and Ruin has that ending, because I don't know if they're getting a second book or not. So it's like, oh, they could be fine.
And I think like the types of open endings that like can be more hit or miss are the ones where like as a reader you don't really know like what's happened to a character, or like Delirium. Part of the reason it's like so disliked is because like the whole series was about love, because it was like people couldn't feel love and this girl falls in love and like it's like a love story, and then at the end you don't know like if she's going to get together with either of the guys. You're like yeah, but like but something like, oh, there's like more in the future for them, maybe, like it's not wrapped up. You don't know like in 20 years they're going to be married with 3 kids, like that's like more of a moderate open ending when you're just like there could be more on the horizon for them.
Yeah, exactly.
But you've still like wrapped up your major plot lines, which I feel like Delirium didn't really do.
See, I feel like the point of the ending of Delirium was that like before she couldn't love, and now she was like allowed to love anyone. Like every option was on the horizon. She could get with all of them if she wanted.
Hello, Desiree. Welcome.
Hi.
Oh my gosh, you have an epic bun right now.
It's amazing.
It's like cotton candy pink. I like it.
I know. I love it.
Very cute.
Well, here, question to draw you into what we were kind of talking about is, do you prefer endings that are like really neatly wrapped up in a bow, or do you prefer things that are more open?
Definitely endings that are wrapped up. Like open endings just make me mad.
Yes.
All right. Well, I mean, moving kind of from that into something, or do we have any comments then? Because I have a question that like kind of goes along with this.
We've got a lot of people talking about their opinions as well in the discussion section. Thank you so much for sharing. If you're watching along, I would highly recommend reading people's experiences. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so if I missed a question, please re-ask it. I am not ignoring it. Things just blocked out.
Yeah. Okay. So,
I have a question real quick.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure. Go for it.
I was going to say, kind of going with like the whole open ending discussion. Has anyone else read What If It's Us?
Not
No.
yet.
Kelly and Adam Silvera.
I think I've read that. Yes, I've read that.
It has kind of an open ending, so I wanted to know people's opinions if anyone had read it.
Uh-oh. No.
I didn't even read it that long ago, but as I'm scrolling through my Goodreads, I'm like, I don't remember anything from any book.
I know. Yeah.
I rated it 3 stars. That's all I can tell.
I feel like I liked the intention of the ending, but I don't know if it was executed as well as I wanted it to be. In general, like I had some issues with the execution of the book. But
Oh, I thought of another open ending that I like. And The Sun is also a star.
That is fun.
Yes. I love that one.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
I
feel
lied.
like-
I sometimes do like open-ended.
I feel like without like the epilogue, I would have been kind of dissatisfied. But that last little scene of them on the plane like makes it. But I love that it's not like, and then they got married and had kids. It's just like there's another chance for them, and you're like, yay!
Yeah.
And I feel like What If It's Us was kind of trying to do a similar thing. And
Yeah, very
not
nice.
as well. Yeah.
I think maybe in that scenario you had to set up enough that it could have been possible. Like you could just have two characters that like hate each other, and then like another epilogue of like, oh, and then they one day found out that they actually loved each other and like got married and ran away into the sunset. Like you have to have enough that the author's like, or the reader is like, okay, yeah, like in that scenario I could see that happening. Hence like on a plane being like, oh my gosh, like yeah, like we had a love thing forever ago and like let's try again. How did I forget about my favorite contemporary book? Yes, thank you for reminding me.
It's gonna be a movie soon.
Yeah, that looks so good. I'm so excited. I'm so happy with who they picked.
Me too.
An open ending that I don't like is Eleanor and Park. It made me so mad.
That's a very divided ending, I feel like.
That one I was not crazy about.
I don't even. What happens in that again? It's been so long since I read that book.
Like,
Spoilers.
oh man, I trying to remember.
It's
like
something about
part
3
ways,
words
she
that I
gets a
don't.
letter, and you know the letter has 3 words in it,
Yeah,
but you never know if she like loved him.
yeah.
Yeah, like I haven't
It
even
was, like,
read it, but I know about the 3 words because people are always like tweeting at Rainbow Row. Like, what are the 3 words?
I wonder if she's just full of regret that was included. Like people will never stop tweeting at me about it.
On
She's
her
like, I don't even
website-
know what the 3 words are.
Yeah, on her website it says like it's like whatever you want it to be. I don't know if it still says that, but like in high school I wrote a paper about Rainbow Row. So like I saw on her website she had like mentioned it. I don't know if it's still up there though. But I thought that was really interesting because everyone was so like upset about that ending. At least everyone that I knew.
Because like, if I had written a book like that, my answer would be, I don't even know what they are. Like, I just thought it was a cool ending.
I thought it was dope. It's fine.
Those
Maybe
are the 3 words. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's something that John Green did pretty well with The Fault in Our Stars, because I was watching kind of like a commentary on that and like Death of the Author and how it's basically open, but it's inferred enough that you know what it is. So like you can kind of draw your own conclusions, but it's not so final that like you are like it's the end. You know, like there's a little bit more that you can be like, oh, well, maybe this happened, but like ultimately you know that Hazel doesn't make it.
And like, I think you feel like a
Spoilers,
key thing with open. Yeah.
Oh, please. That's been out forever.
I think the key to like open endings and kind of endings in general is like having enough like of a closure to the story, you know, like the story feels complete and feels like it's ended, even if you still have questions or there's like still things you don't quite know about it.
Yeah.
You know?
So like in the case of The Fault in Our Stars, the story was about her and August. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Her and August. And so once August is out of the picture, like that's the end of their story. And people tweet at John Green all the time also like, is Hazel alive? Did she die? And he's always just like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want there to be enough room left after I finish a book for people to still be able to like write fan fiction, you know, like I don't want it to be so wrapped up that people are like, well, that's it.
Done forever.
The
I found
author
something
was
that you-
like if I specifically asked if the character was alive and they were like, "Ooh," be like, no, this is not acceptable.
Well, I find it's like kind of difficult sometimes when you can sort of tell when an author only wrote 1 book, but then got a commission for 2, because the ending is usually like, it's kind of weird because like most of it's wrapped up and then there's that one thing that like could be, you know, something. Or in every book, it's like an episodic, like, oh, we have this problem, then we solve it. Then the next book is like, we have this problem, and then we solve it. Like, you can definitely tell when they're just kind of like writing up problems for the sake of writing up problems. And like, that's really what I really don't like about some of these endings.
And TV shows really suffer from that. Their writing really suffers from that. And I think that as books get more like that, because publishers are more afraid to buy a series rather than single books, we are beginning to see that same problem in novels as well.
Well, I feel like one of the problems with novels, particularly in the traditionally published world, is that you don't know if you're going to get a second book. So it's like you have to wrap it up enough that you don't need a second book. And so it's like, how do you really plan to have a satisfying arc when you aren't positive that you're going to get one?
Thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why book 2 always feels like such filler for some series, because you can tell the writer is just like scrambling for ideas to have that big climax for book 3 for the arc, but they're like, oh, just jam this middle. I really think that's why, is because it's harder to plan an arc when you sort of wrapped everything up in book 1.
Yeah.
Book 2, you're creating problems again.
Yeah.
Okay, so like
you,
I have. Oh, okay, it's good. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you mentioned, Erin, that you have kind of a book 2, but you don't know if you're gonna sell it. So like, what do you have planned? How much do you have planned now? And like, what do you do if it sells?
I have everything planned for books 2 and 3. Like complete synopsis written out, because I was hoping to sell it as a trilogy, but publishers are really being careful about buying a whole bunch of books at the same time right now. So that's where you get the whole like selling it as a standalone with series potential, which is like the catchphrase.
And Ellie just put in the discussion section.
And my middle grade sold that way as well, because it did have a second book option, but my publisher was like, oh, you can do a sequel to it, or you can do like a companion novel set in the same sort of world. So yeah, it's weird, but yeah, I don't know. So now I just kind of like cross my fingers and hope that people like book 1 enough to let me write books 2 and 3. Yeah.
That's like another reason I think I'm okay with like a little bit of open-endedness in a book, is like partly so that like people can write fan fiction if they want, but also so like the author can write more if they have more story to tell, you know, even if it's like the end of a series, but they like decide to go back to that world later. Like I like there to be like some like open plot threads and things that they can still play with.
Yeah. Lee Bardugo does that really well. I feel like Maggie Stiefvater did it really well with the Raven Boys.
Yeah, actually, that was kind of one of my issues I had with King of Scars, because as much as I did love that book, and being as less spoilery as I possibly can, there was something kind of that was already wrapped up that she brought back again, and I was a little bit like, how, I don't know, I was a little bit like, come on, like we already finished with this. And it's not that I don't like it, because I did like that thread in previous books. It was just a little bit like, but we finished, we got a definitive ending. And now it's like, surprise, we're bringing something back. And I'm a little bit like, that's not quite what I signed up for.
So I do have issues with like reopened things that should, like, sometimes it can be done well, but not always. Like in the like City of Bones books, isn't it that like Sebastian is dead, but then he's not really dead?
He's not actually, well, he doesn't even die until like way later, and you're like, but he was dead. Well, then actually that's another funny thing. It's like no one's dead unless you see the body. And even then, sometimes even then.
Yeah,
man. Well, like just kind of a thing I kind of wanted to mention is that there's another YouTube channel that I watch that's amazing, and it's Lindsay Ellis, who is a great film critic, and she does like big videos on just storytelling in general, and bringing it back to kind of what we were talking about earlier about like it's difficult to wrap up one book when you have a whole series planned, because then, you know, like the points are at strange places and it's hard to kind of like condense things or like move things around. And she does this amazing series on the Hobbit movies and basically why they're so bad. And one of the main points of it was that the Hobbit itself is a really thin book, but because they decided to make it 3 movies, each movie has to have the initial incident and you know, the action and a climax. So it has to be split into 3, and each of those has to be split into 3 as well. So they're ultimately just making up new plot lines and putting in extra drama because they need another climax for this new movie, even though there really isn't that much in the book to pull from. So that's kind of like why things felt really, like the pacing was really off, and why they felt that like some things didn't work, and why like Smaug dies super early, even though he wasn't supposed to, you know, he was probably supposed to have died like the previous movie. And it's like all this like weird juxtaposition of like what's, you know, what was from one book and what was from other like scripts and stuff. So like definitely go check her out. I love what she talks about, and that one's like such a good lesson in pacing and like plot arc development. So definitely watch Lord of the Rings ones.
Also, the CGI was bad. That was the other issue.
Oh god, it was so bad. It was so bad.
But yes, the storytelling is one.
Yes.
regarding series and planning or whatever, someone mentioned the possibility of writing the series before submitting it, which is always possible and definitely recommended if you are planning on self-publishing a series. Like, yeah, absolutely. If that's what you want to do, go for it. Typically in the traditional publishing world, it's not recommended because you don't know that the first book is even going to sell. My first book, for example, we were hoping to sell a duology and the first book didn't sell. So I'm very glad I didn't write the second book because it meant I was writing a totally different book. So I had another book that we could go on submission with immediately after.
You also like rewrote that book a couple times
Yeah.
too. So if you'd already written a second book, you would have had to like rewrite the second book too. So.
Exactly what I was going to say. The main reason that I am not writing the second and third book and I just have synopsises for them is because I am in the middle of major edits on Witches, and like even down to some of the suggestions have ended up changing some of the characters, like their mannerisms and their personality essentially, right? And I would have to go back and rewrite books 2 and 3, essentially, like a huge amount of them. So it would pretty much be wasting my time, is my opinion of that. So yeah, you're liable to just really, unfortunately, have to rewrite a lot.
Yeah. We had another question. How do you feel about books that have a very unpredictable or off storyline ending? Like it's a very unexpected ending.
When I was scrolling through and remembering the Queen of the Tearling series ending, I had a lot of angry feelings there. I know we didn't all make it to the end of that series, but
It's okay. I read up about it.
the nothing really matters. Why did we bother reading these books endings? I hate.
Oh no.
I hate that none of this really mattered type in. That's part of what I didn't like about Allegiant, was that even before I got to like the ending and like her dying, like I didn't like that it was basically like everything we were dealing with in the first 2 books didn't matter. You know, like forget all that. We have a different issue, you know? And I think you can escalate the conflict and raise the stakes in a way that works, but that didn't work because it was just like, we don't care about the last 2 books and everything that you've cared about for the last couple years.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask, sort of that plays into that, is like, what kind of endings bother you guys? And I hear no Emma's that nothing ever matters, so there's one.
Yeah, and I feel like you can maybe get away with doing very unexpected endings if you've laid down all the groundwork throughout the rest of the book, so that later you're like, oh, look, all the evidence was there. For example, We Were Liars by E. Lockhart does that very well.
Yes.
It does like a genre
So well.
really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even the genre that you think it is, and it's done so well that like I loved it. I would read them 100 more times.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to have like your characters questioning things the whole time and like wondering, and have like other big surprises in the book. You know. Because isn't there some book, Megan, that you didn't like because it like you thought it was going to be one type of book and it ended up being some other genre or something?
Oh yes, it was. It was Liar.
It ended up being like a vampire book or something, or a werewolf book or something.
Yeah, it was supposed to be about this girl who's like a habitual liar, and so there's this murder mystery going on, and you can't tell what happened. But then it turned out that she was a werewolf. And
What?
I had known it was a paranormal maybe, but it was like you got to the midpoint, and then there's a chapter where she's like, "I've been lying about everything. I'm a werewolf."
What the crap?
And it's like if there had been like maybe like more groundwork laid of like odd little supernatural type things, or like something's up with this girl more than her just being a liar, but like something weird's going on, you know, like maybe it could have worked. But
yeah, and I only read it because it was well written, and like if I had known, I would have really enjoyed it.
You guys, that really reminds me. Have you guys read I Am Not a Serial Killer?
No. But I know about that.
Because it had an ending very similar, and I was like, what just happened? Yeah, where it was like contemporary, and then in the very last chapter, it's like, surprise, it's paranormal, and I was like, no, not okay. Yeah, I don't know. That feels like flipping genre on somebody at the last second is just
be really hard to do.
Yeah, like
We Were Liars is one of the few that does it well.
Yeah.
Yeah. hints of it all through, but this felt very out of the blue for me, at least.
I'm trying to remember the book. There was another one that flipped genres that I really enjoyed, where the girl is being hunted by a serial killer and ends up like hiding in this very strange town. What was it called?
Oh,
I remember
wasn't it-
wanting
I
to
think
read
you-
this because you
Yeah,
talked.
I think you mentioned that to me
I
before
have.
too.
It's got the girl on the cover
I
and
remember talking
there's
about
birds.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm gonna find it.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember what it was called.
Is it literary? It sounds literary.
No, it's a YA.
Well, why it can be literary.
It's like a genre YA.
Okay.
Go to the Goodreads app and just wait.
Scrolling through
She's on
Goodreads.
Goodreads now. I'm so
Yeah,
excited.
I'm pretty sure I just recently deleted it from my TBR when I was like purging my TBR, but I don't remember what it was.
Oh, no.
Is it Shadowlands?
Yes.
Yeah, Shadowlands.
Ah,
I was like, I
okay.
can picture the cover.
Now I can see the cover as soon as you said it.
Yeah.
That sounds cool.
It's a beautiful cover too. Oh my gosh.
There are too many books.
That was one that I actually didn't read the rest of the series because I felt like the first one was perfect on its own, and I didn't feel like a trilogy would have done the first story justice.
Does she go to the town right away though? Like, is it?
So
Well,
it
for-
opens with there's this serial killer, and her dad is like an investigator or something, and the serial killer, they find out, is targeting her specifically.
Mhm.
And so the family goes into witness protection, and it opens with like them finding this out and having to flee to the town.
Okay, so but I feel like it works because the town is probably introduced earlier in the book and not like, hey, surprise,
Oh,
in the last chapter. Yeah, that's why I'm Not a Serial Killer didn't work for me, because it was like so last minute and like end of the book, right? Whereas I feel like if you introduce it earlier on, it's a little less of a shock to the system, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's always those. I mean, it could happen with genre as well, but it's always those weird things that are introduced in like the last book of a series or just at the very end that you're like, what is happening? And that's where it's like draws you out of the story because it just comes out of nowhere.
I feel like you're established in that world and then they pull the rug out from under your feet. Like, what was the one that was like established as just a simple paranormal, like urban fantasy, and then it got really sexy later on? Anita something. Fans
Anita
were
Blake.
really mad about it. It was a whole series, and she was just like paranormal, and there were werewolves and stuff.
Is it Anita Blake?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
No, I remember that too because I did end up reading that, and I was, I don't know, like I was definitely underage, and reading that and, like going through my vampire phase, of course, and being like, oh, this like looks so fun, and I was like, yeah, girls kicking ass and like
Yeah,
vampires, and then suddenly it was like, oh wow, okay, like, whoa.
very like normal, paranormal, like urban fantasy type thing, and then after like 4 or 5 books, it just randomly switched to like erotica, and a lot of fans were like, what?
I still have vivid memories of some of those passages. I wish I didn't because I'm like, wow, lady, okay,
Right? Like,
yeah.
I read that
No.
series too. I remember reading one of the books in class and being like, wait.
what's
No
happening?
one look at me.
Yeah,
I
pretty
was
much.
like probably like 12 or 13.
Oh no! Oh no! Bless.
Like, you get these fans that aren't expecting this or desiring it, frankly, and then spring that on them. Like, no,
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the
definitely.
thing. Like you can do it while like the Sookie Stackhouse books. It's like no one pretended like there weren't gonna be very intense sex scenes. So
Yeah.
you knew
Yeah.
from the start.
from day one, you knew that this was what it was about. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's when you bring it in, like surprise.
Yeah.
Surprise, unpleasant surprise.
Oh dear. Well, like that was actually one of the y'all know that I love Cassandra Clare and City of Bones and all that stuff, but like that was one of my major issues with the end of the City of Bones series and also like sort of in the other series as well. I won't spoil like what books they're in or anything, because I know some people, it's a long series, I get it. But in the end of the City of Bones series, she like randomly introduces this other aspect to the world that like makes no sense, comes out of absolute nowhere, and then we just spend like half of the book in this like alternate reality demon dimension, and I'm like, I never saw this being set up. This absolutely does not work with this world. Like, what is happening here? This like, where are you going? Like, how did this become anything? And there's this weird like oh, timeline stuff. Okay, so now there's timeline stuff, and it was just like, where is this coming from? It was just like, where is this coming from? And that's what really pulled me out of the story, because I was like, I don't care about anything that happens in this world, because this like other like alternate thing is just super like does not go with the rest of the series. I think you could have made your characters reach their goals with like stuff just in the normal world. Like, why do you have to introduce this whole other thing? And that's a paranormal story. You know, she's constantly introducing like now more vampire stuff, now more werewolf stuff, now more fairy stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm down for it because we've established this already paranormal world. And then you were like, demons and angels. And I'm like, okay, I can still, yes, okay, the way that you've explained this all, I can make it work. And then you're like, alternate dimension, timeline stuff. And I'm like, no, you're too many things all at once. Yeah. So like, that's what I really did not like about that series.
Yeah. Harry Potter's the only one for me that has just like surprise time travel, and I was like, yeah, okay. But like normally if that happens, I'm like, no, I'm done.
And then also just never comes up again in the rest of the books ever. That one book where you time travel and no other place. And no one else does it either, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, there are some problems with that, but I don't know. I have a hard time critiquing J.K. Rowling.
We had a question from M. Foster. How do you feel about series that are a set of stories in the same world but different main characters in each story? So like books.
I love those. I love like Robin Lefevre's His Fair Assassin trilogy. Each one follows like a different character, but like the main story arc is all connected, but it's following different characters. It's so good.
That's cool.
I love when series do that, when they like move between characters. I know a lot of times like readers will complain like, but I wanted more of this character, but I feel often like the main character's story arc has been completed, you know, like they've gotten their like ending, but like the main plot still has more. And I'd rather just like see glimpses of them than like have more conflict like introduced into like their personal storyline when it doesn't need to be there, you know?
Well, that could be a good tip for people that are wanting to write more in a world or of a storyline, but then feel like they've already resolved their character, or their character is, you know, like done with theirs and out of the game, and instead of just making up a random like, oh, this person who loves you cheated on you and now here's some more dynamics, like just make it another person within the same world within me who's also maybe having similar issues.
Like To All the Boys I've Loved Before style, where it's like we're having the exact same conflict we had in the first book.
No.
I'm trying to remember, there was like some book recently and people wasn't that recent, but it was the Illuminae books. I remember like after the first Illuminae book, people were like upset that like Katie and Ezra weren't going to be the main characters of like the second and third books. But it was like, but they've like gotten together, their like personal story arc is done, like
through more than most of those kind of series. Like by the end of book 3 there were a lot of things going on, a lot of people.
Oh my gosh, I love that series.
I feel like it definitely works with certain series really well.
Ellie recommended in the discussion section books by Julie Dow. She did Force of a Thousand Lanterns.
Yes.
Phoenix. And I love all of her books. So definitely recommend her. Roshni Chokshi also does a really good job of this. If you're wanting examples because you are thinking of doing something like that.
We were talking in the pre-chat about this past week I got to read like an advanced copy of There's Something About Sweetie by Cynthia Menon, which is like a companion book to When Dimple Met Rishi, and it's really good. I think it works really well in romance. Like that's a really common thing in romance where like you have a series and like all the characters like know each other, but it's a different pair in each. I like won't read like romance series where it like follows the same couple. Like if I come across a series like that, I'm like, no, because I just know there's gonna be unnecessary like drama and conflict that I'm not here for.
We had another question from Flautist58. Is it possible to give answers to the questions you raised in the first act too quickly?
Yep.
Yes. I actually just read a book that did that, and just read a book that did that. It's kind of strange though, because like of course, you know, you need reveals to drive your plotline forward, but then you don't want to reveal stuff too quickly. So like instead of maybe revealing something, maybe let's just like put another hint or like put another, you know, strange occurrence that maybe will like, clue the audience into there definitely is something here. It's not my imagination, but just don't go outright and be like, I am this evil person in disguise, haha, and then
or give like
going.
a possible explanation, but it's like not quite right, like something to like cling on to for now, and then you realize that there was like more to it, or it was like wrong or something.
Yeah, that's a big like horror trope. The character thinks they've figured it out, and you as the reader are like, there's 150 pages left.
All right, shall I ask the question that we're all dreading, and that is, what is some of your favorite ends to series or just books in general?
I have
series.
One. This is kind of an obvious one that I feel like other people will probably agree with, but I really, really love the end of A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. It's like the perfect series end, and it like has that perfect balance of like wrapping up the major plot threads and like kind of letting you know like where the characters are going to be for now, but like it's not like this is what they're doing for the rest of their lives. It's like they have this now, and there's like a little bit of like bittersweetness in there, but it feels like really appropriate to the characters' story arcs. Like, even though you're like, oh, I want like Kel and Rye to still like be together all the time, like you're like, this totally makes sense for their characters, So good. That like final like scene, so good.
Having feelings now.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'm definitely gonna bring in a Cassandra Clare thing and just be like, I love the Clockwork
I was
series.
about to say that.
Yeah, because like, okay, the other series did not end well, but that series does it so well because you've wrapped up all the major plot lines and you get this like really intense emotional wrap up as well, in a little bit of a different way than maybe you'd expect. And oh man, it's just like all these things that you don't think are gonna happen or work out properly somehow work out, but in a different way than you're expecting, and that's what I really love about it. And like that emotionally crippled me. Because I finished that book at like 4 a.m. because I had been just binging the whole thing, and I was like an inconsolable, like sobbing mess. But at the same time, I was like, I feel so like grounded, and I'm so happy for everybody, and like I'm so happy that everything like came together. Like it's such a satisfying ending. So like that one is still one of my all-time favorite endings.
And like I feel like both of those series that we've mentioned like are really good examples of like how it's important, especially at the end of a series, to not just have like plot closure, but you need to have like emotional closure too, like especially at the end of a series, like give the characters like a moment to like kind of like reflect, like pause and reflect and like take in everything that's happened and like react, like, yeah, you definitely need like a little bit of that emotional closure, and not just like we've beat the bad guy, all the plot threads are wrapped up, but it's like, but we need to see the characters like dealing with that.
Yeah. Well, that's what I both liked and disliked about the end of the Hunger Games, because it was like that little epilogue, which I don't think needed to be there, and I have my own issues with that, but like how she was saying like, oh, we've been rebuilding, and like, I didn't want to have kids, and it took a really long time for PETA to convince me to do so, and like I still wake up after nightmares sometimes, and like and he's really good about being there, like that kind of is the little part is good to kind of show a little bit of everything's not perfect, even though it did end. I just have an issue with books ending the happy ending as we get married and have kids. But other than that,
I think that the like final scene before that epilogue did a perfectly good job of like establishing like the emotional closure without the epilogue. If it had just ended there.
So how do you decide if your book needs an epilogue or if you've reached a satisfying ending without one?
Ooh, that's hard.
I would mostly say like don't write in. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say if it feels abrupt, then you should probably have a little bit of a. If you can't add more to that scene, then maybe have a epilogue.
Yeah, it's true. Like sometimes like a jump forward in time is good. Like if it kind of like ends with action and you want to like jump forward to like after like some of the like rebuilding has happened and stuff. I like also would like mostly say like don't write an epilogue just because you think a book has to have an epilogue. Like I think sometimes that happens, like where we like read epilogues a lot, like in Harry Potter and stuff growing up, and so you're like, obviously I have to write an epilogue to show everybody what happened to my characters, and like you don't have to. It's sometimes okay to not have that.
Yeah.
I think a really good epilogue is, and I've like been like freaking out about this for like the last week, but the final How to Train Your Dragon movie, which just came out, has like a really good example of an epilogue and like how to make an epilogue work. And like I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil the movie, but like it does a really, really good job of just kind of like, because I think really good epilogues a lot of the time will just kind of offer you like a snapshot, you know, like they don't try to go into too much detail. Like that's part of the problem with the Harry Potter one is it's like, let me tell you all of the kids' names and like everybody's children and, you know, and it's like a little too much instead of just like getting a snapshot of like resolving some like emotional point, you know, or showing like what the future holds for the characters.
Having a beta reader can also be helpful, or several beta readers. And just if you're not sure, or even if you think you absolutely need it, sometimes if you have a good beta reader, they'll be able to tell you like, hey, you don't need this.
Or if you're
and that's why
you're satisfying in the first place.
Yeah, that's why beta readers are important at every stage of writing. Not just like, oh, well, this is my debut book. Like you should also be giving it to beta readers when you're on the last book in the series. We've got some good conversation going on in the discussion section. Not seeing any new questions. Again, re-ask them if I missed it.
Right, well, we've been going for almost an hour. So does anybody have any final thoughts, especially maybe those of us who have finished multiple books?
I feel like there is this idea that you need to know it all when you get started, and that's definitely not the case. Like, do what works for you, and don't feel like just because you wrote a certain ending in your first draft that has to be the ending in your second draft. I have found in my experience that most of the time when I get to the end of a second draft, I have thought of different ways that I can really amp up the climax and the following action, and the instinct is kind of not to do that because it's a lot of work, and usually it means I have to do a third draft so that I can make sure everything leads up correctly. But it's worth it for sure. If you have an idea that you're like, I don't know, that seems kind of hard, you should do that thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can always rewrite the ending if you don't get it right the first time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, like having when you initially come up with an idea and you're very excited about it, and you have, usually, at least for me, it's like an inciting incident, thinking about where my character is for that inciting incident and where I want my characters to be when everything wraps up. And having it doesn't even have to be specific, but having a vague idea of how this is all going to end, essentially, is to have something to shoot for, either while I'm outlining or writing, and becomes less, makes it less foggy, I guess, and distant and confusing. So,
yeah, I care more about knowing like where my characters end than like where my plot ends up. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, we did have a question that I missed earlier from Eric Black Level. How do you write when your story seems to fall off the rails that you plotted out? Which is kind of going along with what we're talking about.
Replot.
Decide if those rails are better than the old ones. Yeah, and like some people are especially like so focused on like it has to be exactly like how I plotted it, but if it's, you know, going in a different direction and you're like, oh, this makes more sense, or like, oh, I like this, you know, how this would end a lot better, then go for it. No one's holding you up to doing very specific things.
Yeah, I would say like take a couple days or a few days, however long you need, to like kind of like sit with like the new direction that your story's taking, and like plot out like with this direction like what will change and like what direction you want the story to take now, and then like give yourself a few days and compare that to your original plan and decide, yeah, what's going to work better.
For sure.
All right. Well, if that is everything, we might as well wrap it up for the time being. She'll end the end. This was actually a really fun chat. I'm glad we got to kind of talk about, what we're doing, how we did it, what we enjoy about endings. Because like ending a story is kind of, it's bittersweet. It's always sad because you're leaving behind something that you did, but you can just write a bunch of companion novels and then you just don't have to leave it all.
Never ends.
So as always, we will be having our daily videos throughout the entire week. And we will see you on next Sunday. Do we already have
talking about The Good Place?
Yeah.
Just pulled it out. Just
Right.
freaked out.
So if you watch The Good Place or know of The Good Place, I mean, watch out for spoilers. I'm sure it's going to happen. We're going to be discussing The Good Place in all of its beautifully plotted, amazingly planned, character-developed glory. So make sure to tune in for that, of course, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. We will see you throughout the week, and I hope you guys have a good week ahead of you. Bye! Bye.